Welcome everyone to today's webcast about combining SAP and Excel to solve a lot of common problems. My name is Christian Kelsing, and with me today I also have Charles Howard. We are both with Winshuttle, and we're both dialing in from sunny Seattle out of the West Coast on the US. Today is going to be all about combining SAP and Excel, so we just want to start by sharing two impressive numbers about each here. So 16,000 is actually the number of different T codes inside of SAP. That just gives you an idea of the complexity of this very common backbone for large enterprises. The other number here is the number of Excel users worldwide. So Excel is by far the most popular business tool out there in the marketplace. And today is going to be all about T codes and Excel, and how we can use Excel to tame the complexity of all of these T codes. So I want to point out first and foremost, before we dive into this, that everything that you're going to see today applies to all of the core modules in SAP ERP. So everything we'll show you around using Excel as a very effective tool to handle some of the transactional workload around SAP can be applied to all of these modules. We're obviously not going to have time to cover all of the 16,000 today, so we're going to focus on two of them in particular. And one of them is going to be an example from finance. So we're going to show you how you can use Excel to very effectively do your FB50 journal uploads. And then we're also going to show you a master data example and focus on the transaction VK12 and how you can use Excel to do mass changes of pricing conditions for materials. Now, the fundamental problem that we're solving is that SAP is obviously a world-class transactional engine. It's what most of you run your business on. It's the backbone of any large enterprise, and it's very secure, it's very scalable, and it's a market-leading ERP system. But SAP, like any other ERP system, is fundamentally a one-size-fits-all, and that means that it comes out with these generic, fairly complex and inflexible screens. And that creates a lot of manual work for all of you. Basically, the screens and the way that it's configured, it's never really a good match with the way that you do your business. Like your particular business process does not always match exactly the way that SAP works out of the box. So that ends up creating a lot of manual work for a lot of people like yourself. And you often have to actually get through that just with brute force. And one of the examples that we're going to show you today, as mentioned before, is going to be around FB50, because particularly in finance and accounting, you actually see a peak of these manual workloads at the end of every month when you're getting to the time where you're going to be closing the books, and there's always a backlog of extra work that has to be done. And those complex and inflexible screens in SAP just makes that workload even harder. So since we're talking about finance, I just really quickly want to do a poll with you guys, and we're going to share the results with everyone. So please do respond to this. So if you are in finance, we'd like to know which of the functional areas within finance do you actually work with in SAP. So this is not which areas does your company work with. This is what do you personally work with within SAP when it comes to finance. And this is just for those of you who are in finance. We have another question coming up for the rest of you. So I'll just give it another few seconds here for you to answer those questions, and then we'll share the results with everyone. So again, if you are in finance, which functional areas within finance do you work with SAP? We can see lots of answers coming in here, so thank you very much for sharing those answers. So I'm going to share the results with everyone here so we can have a quick look at that. And as we can see, not surprisingly, the general ledger is the primary issue here. No, not necessarily issue, but this is the primary area where you guys are coming from. Fixed assets is interesting as well. That's a little bit industry dependent, whether that's something you're working with or not, or whether you have a lot of people in that area. So thanks for that. This is very helpful for us to help tailor the demo when we know what area that you guys are coming from. Now, we talked a little bit about the manual work associated with these complex and inflexible screens in SAP. The other problem we want to talk about is almost an even bigger problem, because no one wants to do manual work, obviously. And manual work is time-consuming, it's taking up resources, unnecessary resources, and so forth. But an even bigger problem is that what's the consequence of all of this? So because you have a lot of manual processes around SAP, it is inevitable that bad data is going to sneak its way into the system. When you have manual processes, errors and mistakes will happen. When you have manual processes, delays will happen. You won't always get all the data in there in time. You won't always get the data updated in time. And that will often cause business interruptions. And those can be very costly for your business. So for example, it might be a delivery truck. It's going to show up at the wrong location because the address on the customer master record in SAP was not correct. It might be manufacturing equipment that cannot start making your product on time because the recipe or the bill of materials hasn't been configured correctly in SAP. It might be orders that are not shipping on time because the underlying master data for the sales order is not in the system, and then you can't load the sales order, and then you can't start shipping the product. This is a very common issue we hear from a lot of the people we work with. Is it's very frustrating when you have a customer who's ordered something from you, you have the product sitting in your warehouse, it's ready to go, you have the delivery guys, they're ready to go, but the product cannot ship because the sales order has not been pushed into the system because the underlying master data was not ready for it. So those are some of the things that happen as a consequence of all of this manual work around SAP. So what we want to do now is, since we're talking about master data, just quickly have another poll here before we get into our examples. So if you work with master data, which master data objects do you work with? So again, for those of you who are on a regular basis updating master data in SAP, and you can check all of the ones that apply here. Do you work with materials, customers, vendors, financial master data, or some of the other master data objects that are inside of SAP? So please respond to this poll, and then we'll share the results with everyone. So again, if you're working with master data, which out of all of these master data objects in SAP do you yourself work with directly? And again, not surprisingly, we can see materials as being the most common master data object that everybody has issue with. And obviously, materials is, come in many forms and shapes, and there's all sorts of materials. There's raw materials, finished goods, semi-finished goods. Everything we're going to show you today obviously applies to all of that. So we're going to be focusing on material examples today, so that is really well aligned with what you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so considering those problems that we talked about, we have the manual work that's there because of the complex and inflexible screens in SAP. But not only is it obviously not great to have a manual workload that's inefficient, even worse is the costly consequences of the mistakes that might happen in a manual process, because you're going to have bad or incomplete data in the system that might cause some sort of interruption in the business. And then that usually means that you will end up having to go through some firefighting exercises to actually resolve those problems. So what if you could actually replace those complex interfaces in SAP with user-friendly Excel-based solutions? And as we saw earlier on, there's more than 750 million Excel users out there. Excel is a very familiar tool. It's a tool that most people in the business can pick up and learn if they don't already know it. So what if you could actually take these multiple screens in SAP that are very one-size-fits-all, hence they're very generic, they all have a lot of attributes on them, and you could consolidate that into one easy-to-use Excel template. And again, most of you guys on this webinar will have great skills around Excel, you can customize these templates with your own colors and your own layouts to actually lay it out in a way that makes sense to the business. You can apply business context to it so it actually looks like something the business will recognize, and then you can have more people actually interact with SAP in a lot more productive way. And again, once you're talking about mass updates, which is one of the examples we're going to show you today, Excel is a great tool once you're dealing with lots and lots and lots of data. So we're going to jump to the demos here. So I want to emphasize that what we're going to be showing first is really the end user experience. So when you see this, imagine this is the end result of creating a solution where more people in IT or in the business can be doing mass updates, but also providing an alternative interface to SAP by using Excel. So we have the two examples that we mentioned earlier on. We're going to be showing an FB50 journal uploads, and we're going to be focusing on a mass change scenario around pricing with a DK12. So I'm now going to hand you over to Charles.
Thanks, Christian. So real quick before we get started, there is a questions panel in GoToWebinar. So as I'm going through this, if there's any questions that you have, feel free to raise them there. I won't be able to answer them real time, but we'll try to get to some at the end. And those that we can't get to, we'll answer after the webinar and send a follow-up email for. So the first demo that I'm going to be showing you is my FB50 example for a journal entry. And here I am in the Excel template that I've built. You can see that I've added some of my own formulas in here. As Christian was mentioning, you can customize this to look and feel however you want. The first thing that we'll notice is that I have a balance checker, so I can see that I'm about $27 off on my balance. Looking through this, I know that I maybe just forgot to type in a 0 here. So if I update that value, balance updates to reflect a 0 balance, so I know I should be good there. And that's really the validation that we can do from within the Excel file. Within validation to SAP, we actually have the option to check this data against any rules or config that you have on your SAP system. So up in our Winshuttle tab here, we have the script that I'm going to be using, and I can actually choose to validate this. So if I click on that and select my SAP system, my client, and then type in my credentials, it's actually going to be sending this data into SAP to validate that the data I have here is right. And I can see here that I'm actually getting a message saying the cost center doesn't exist. So if I look at my cost center here, you can see that that cost center probably doesn't exist. I'm going to just go ahead and update that, and I can go ahead and revalidate to make sure that that's going to work. If, as an end user, I didn't know what a valid entry here is, we also have the ability to look up values. So if I click on this, it will again bring me into SAP, and it showed up on my other screen here. But you can see that we have the F4 help here to basically allow end users to find the entries that they maybe don't know exist. So if I search for this, and again it popped up on my other screen, but we can see the list of cost centers here. I'm going to just back out because I already have my entry there. At this point, I can revalidate, if I go ahead and clear these out, to make sure that it's picking up the correct cost center now and that I no longer have any data issues. Okay, looks like I'm set. And so at this point, I can go ahead and actually try and post this into SAP. And when it's done doing that, I should see a posting result here that gives me a document number for the posting. Go ahead and click Run. And we can see that it's gone in and posted that to SAP. If I grab this document number and head into FB03, we can see the journal entry that I just posted here, starting off with my petty cash entry and then the rest of the entries here. So you can really quickly see this. This is real-time interaction with SAP, and all from within an Excel interface. Now the next example I'm going to be going over is pricing conditions. So here's my next script, And in this one, what we're actually going to do is download the data out of SAP and then make a change to it in the Excel file and submit those changes back to SAP. So from within this interface, again, you can see I'm in my Winshuttle add-in. I've got some formulas here as well, like a valid to and valid from date that are being populated down here. And I've got an automatic price change that I'm going to apply to the current amount that is in SAP that will then populate here in the new amount. So slightly different interface here because I'm using my query tool to actually extract this out of SAP. But if I click Run, it's going to give me what we call a runtime variable wizard. And what this does is actually allow me to filter the data that I'm bringing back so that I'm not bringing back all material pricing conditions. I'm just bringing back the ones that I want to work with. And so we have some values here that are already defaulted. We have some that are fixed values that an end user can't actually interact with. And then we've got some that actually prompt the end user for some input. So for a material list, I'm just going to type in a range here and pull back a fairly limited number of results for this demo. Do note that you can pull back as many records as you want. Typically the filtering is allowing you to get just the records you want, but there really is no Winshuttle limit on how many records you can extract. And so here we can see the data that is pulled down, and again I have my current amount along with the new amount that I'm going to update it, as well as the new valid from and valid to dates. Now that I'm ready to actually submit this back into SAP, I can switch to my transaction script that's actually going to be doing the updates. You'll notice again that the interface switches back to transaction, which again gives me my validate option, my run option, things like that. So just to be safe, again, I'm just going to validate, and we'll see the validation messages populate here. Okay, and it looks like I'm all set. So again, at this point, I'm going to just run, and because I've already logged into SAP in my previous script, I'm actually still logged in here, so it's not going to prompt me for credentials this time. So I'm going to go ahead and just run, and we'll actually see that update the SAP log column here to indicate that the condition records have been saved. And again, if I hop into SAP and just real quickly take a look, I can see the price that I typed in and my new valid from date. So again, all within an Excel interface, but doing sort of a round trip in pulling that data from SAP, making the changes in Excel, and then submitting that back to SAP. And now I'm going to hand it back off to Christian.
So that was a great demo. Thanks for that, Charles. And just to point out, because I know there's a lot of you on this webcast today that are actually existing customers, what Charles is really showing you here is the brand new Studio V11. So if it looks a little bit unfamiliar, it's because this is actually the latest version where we made a lot of improvements in terms of user interface and usability to make all the common things that you're doing with Winshuttle even faster and even easier to do. What I want to talk to you about now, just before we jump into the other demo that Charles is going to give you around how you actually develop these scripts, I want to talk to you about this thing that we call the automation gap. So obviously, no one wants to do manual work, and no one wants to have a manual process around SAP. Yet, there is still so many manual processes out there. So why is that? I mean, these technologies and tools have been around for a long time, and there's many different ways that you can try and alleviate some of these problems with these generic complex interfaces. So if you just think about the fact that we talked about in the beginning how SAP actually has more than 16,000 different T-codes or transactions. And if you start looking at all of these T-codes and you start classifying them based on how complex they are, but not only that, you also think about the amount of data that you're going to be putting through that transaction. So is it a lot of data? How frequent do you use that transaction? Then there's going to be T-codes and scenarios where, the transaction, the standard transaction is not really that complex and you're not really using that often. Maybe you're doing a delivery block on a customer every 2 weeks. It's easy to do in standard SAP. You're probably just going to keep doing it manually. It's simply just not a problem that's big enough worth doing anything about. In the other end of the scale, you're going to have the scenarios where the standard transaction is extremely complex, or the data volume that you're dealing with is extremely high. And this is where you'll find some of your classic ETL scenarios where you have your point-to-point integration with some strategic business partners or what have you. However, what we're seeing is there's this huge automation gap that the business is experiencing between these two opposite ends of the spectrum, where you have scenarios where, it's just complex enough, or it's just enough volume that it's just too difficult to keep doing it manually. But it's not quite up there where you're going to get a large budget and where you have the time and resources to go out and develop custom programs and get a project set up the classic way within IT. And in that automation gap, that is really where Winshuttle has a very compelling tool set where, because you can actually, the Winshuttle tools are built in a way that it's usable by a much broader user base. So you can get more people involved in not only running these uploads to SAP and queries from SAP, but you can also have a broader base of people that are actually creating and developing these scripts. So keep that automation gap in mind, because that actually exists in most businesses, because there's that spot in the middle there where it's painful enough that you have to do something. It's just too painful to keep doing it manually. But it's not quite up there where you're getting the priority with a larger scale and costly IT project. So what if you actually had a very user-friendly product, so you could create these types of Excel solutions in 3 simple steps without programming? Those are actually the principles that we've been using when we designed Winshuttle. And as I was saying before, what Charles is actually showing you here is the brand new version 11, where we really stepped up this even further and made our products, which have always been used by a broad user base within the business, but we've now made them even more intuitive. And we've worked with 400 different end users to actually figure out how we can improve that user experience even more. So what Charles is going to show you in this demo now is the developer experience. So think about the 2 solutions that we demoed before, which again is something that you can apply within any core module within SAP, not just the 2 T codes we're showing you here. Think about, what's the developer experience for creating those solutions. So when Charles is demoing this, I want all of you to think about, when you watch Charles doing this, who do you think can create these solutions? Is that going to be a broader user base than the ones that are normally creating the custom? Think about, is this something that you could actually do yourself? If you have Excel skills, are you able to pick up what Charles is going to show you? So with that, I'm going to hand you back to Charles, and he will do another demo.
Thanks again, Christian. So as Christian mentioned, this is our new Studio 11 user interface. So for those of you that are current customers and haven't seen it, this will be sort of a walkthrough of the new interface. But here I am in the main screen here. I'm going to be showing you how to create a recording in Transaction to update data in SAP. And so you see that we have the different modules here. I did use a query script previously as well, so that is also an option, all within the same user interface. But I'm going to go ahead and create from an SAP recording. And again, I'm prompted to log into my SAP server. And just a quick note, because I didn't touch on it earlier, but we respect any of the SAP security you have in place already. So if, for example, I didn't have access to this system, I wouldn't be able to log into it now or access any T codes that I don't have access to. So you're not able to do anything in Winshuttle that you wouldn't at least be authorized to do in SAP. So I'll go ahead and log in here. And now it prompts me for my T code, and I'm going to just show an example of MMO2. If I hit enter, it immediately launches me into SAP and puts me into MMO2. And at this point, it's really just recording all of the actions that I'm taking in SAP. So as I type in a value here, it's going to pick that up. If I hit the Enter key, it's picking that up. As I select my basic data 1, it's also picking that up. And it's continually picking these things up as I'm working through the recording. So if I click Continue here, for our purposes, I'm just going to make a slight change to the description. Maybe I want to update the gross weight and net weight. And then I'm just going to go ahead and save. And once I save, that sends a signal to Winshuttle that the recording is over. And you can see it brings Studio back up, tells me my recording is complete, and it's creating the mapping. I'm now automatically moved into the mapping interface, where in the basic view you can see all of the fields that I actually touched in the recording, including material number, the description, and then the gross and net weight. So in order to map this to my Excel file, you see I've got an Excel interface down here. If I have a pre-existing template that I wanted to map this to, I could open that up at this point, or I could just map into this blank Excel file and create one brand new. So at this point I'm just dragging and dropping from the Excel column that I want it mapped to the fields in SAP. So in this case I'll drag from column A up to material number, and you can see that my mapping type has changed here. The value is now column A, and I've got a header here as well as my default value. So I can continue doing that for the rest of my values. I can also map them en masse. And so we have our template here. We've also got some advanced features that you can use. So if you have the need for things like a conditional statement or building a loop, you can do that from within what we call the expert view of our mapper, which is actually showing all of the technical details behind the recording itself. So not only just the fields that we hit, but the SAP OK codes associated with it and the screens that we're going through. So if, for example, I wanted to create an if condition, I could select a field here, and I've got the Create Condition button up here. You'll see that we have a wizard. I can tie the condition to a column. I can make it only for the first transaction, tie it to an SAP field itself. We have a lot of different options for building these conditions and making the script as flexible as you need it to be, or as foolproof as you need it to be for your end users. This is also where you can turn on validation. So if I click that, it's going to allow validation and give me a validate log. And there's a few other settings that we can play with here, but at this point I'm going to save both my script and my data file. So I'll save both of those. And now actually move into the run screen. And in the run screen, we have a fairly similar interface to what we saw in the end user example. So a lot of these options are also available in the add-in. And then we have an Excel interface that we're actually working with here. And this is completely workable, so I can add in additional values here. And I'll just fill out some data here. Okay. And then we've got some additional options that I'll go ahead and walk through. So things like backup data. What this will do is actually take a sample of the SAP data as it was before I actually make the changes that I'm about to make, so that if on the off chance that I make a mistake and need to go back and redo that, I've got the values previously. I don't need to go searching through SAP or elsewhere to try and find what those values were. I've actually just got them pre-populated in this Excel file to use to re-upload if I made a mistake. So at this point, I can go ahead and validate again. And again, we see success messages. Now that I'm ready to run, I can go ahead and run that. And we see my SAP messages here. It's also given me a new sheet here, which is backup and then a date and timestamp. And if I look on here, I can see my material number, the old descriptions, and the old weights. So again, just in case, I've got this data here to put it back into SAP if the changes I made were in error. And I can hop back into SAP here. And see that my description has changed back, and my gross and net weight are back to 170. All right, and now back to you again, Christian.
Thanks, Charles. That was a great demo. I've been watching some of the questions coming in here, and I can definitely tell there's a few of you who are existing customers, and that's great that you are on this webinar. So just on that note, I'm just going to launch one more poll before we get into the Q&A, and then we'll try and tackle some of the questions that you've all been sending through. So it'll just be really helpful for us to know, how familiar are you already with Winshuttle? So is this the first time that you hear about Winshuttle, or is it that you've never really used Winshuttle? Are you somewhat familiar with Winshuttle? You've used it a little bit, or are you someone that would kind of consider yourself an experienced Winshuttle user? So if you could all answer that question, that would be very, very helpful, and then I'll share the poll results with everyone here. So I'll give it another few seconds. So how familiar are you with Winshuttle? All right, so for those of you who haven't voted already, please tick one of the circles here. So we're going to go ahead and close out this poll, and I'll share the results with everyone. So it looks like we've got about 50-50 in terms of who is new to Winshuttle and who has some level of experience with Winshuttle. So that's great. So let's move on to the actual Q&A session here. We had more than 1,100 people signed up for this session, so we are not going to be able to get through all of the questions, obviously. But what we're going to do in the next couple of days, we're going to turn around an FAQ as quickly as possible and make sure that all of your individual questions get answered. And I can definitely tell in there that there's quite a few questions as it relates to the user interface, because if you have not upgraded yet to Studio V11, this will look a bit different. And I can clarify that a lot of the stuff that looked a lot like Excel is actually Winshuttle Studio. And that is because the way that we've designed version 11 is to look exactly like Excel. So the usage patterns and the use model and the concepts of using Studio are the same as using Excel. And the whole idea being is that if you're familiar with an Excel use model, you should fairly easily be able to pick up and use Studio. Because at the end of the day, Studio users are typically very familiar with Excel. So let's just take some of the questions here before we finish up. So Charles, there's some questions for you here, and those demos were great. So there's a question here: does the validation occur within Winshuttle or in SAP? That's a very good question.
Okay, yeah, great question. It's actually both. So we can certainly validate against the rules set up in SAP, as I showed in the validate option and in a few of the scripts there. You can also validate against rules you've set up in Excel or within Winshuttle against like the conditional statements that we went over in the authoring example. So both. You kind of can use both as a method of validating data before trying to post it.
Very cool, thank you. And here's another one. I know that everything you showed was live, Charles, but there's actually a question here. Can we schedule scripts to run at a specified time? So rather than, I guess, posting it right away, can you schedule it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So you can schedule scripts to run at a later time, either on a recurring basis, so every day, every week, every month, or as just a one-time job that you maybe want to run overnight while you're at home.
Thanks. And here is probably the most frequently asked question in there, from what I can tell, is how do we get our hands of the new version of Studio?
So the new version of Studio is available. Anyone that wants to get their hands on it would just need to contact our support group, at support.winshuttle.com, and there's a link to create a support ticket, and you can just request the download link from them. One of the neat features about this is that you can actually have your existing 10.x version as well as version 11 installed. So for those of you that would like to do some testing in version 11, you don't actually need to get rid of the version that you're using now.
Oh, that's great. So we're going to move on to the next steps here. So as I said, we'll follow up with all of you. So you'll get a follow-up email with answers to all of the questions. There's literally lots and lots of questions in there. And there are a lot of very specific feature function questions in there. So it'll be interesting for all of you to look through that FAQ once it comes out. So if you found the webcast today interesting, there's just 3 things I want you guys to think about as next steps. First and foremost, if you want to learn more, go to winshuttle.com/studio. We've got a wealth of resources there. There's lots of case studies from all a broad variety of different industries. There's also a lot more comprehensive product demos. We've got all the technical details about the products. And we've also got a collection of customer interviews. And there you can get some more ideas of where to actually use these tools. The second thing, if you are going to Sapphire, the big SAP show in Orlando in Florida coming up in May, by all means, step by and also see the new version of Foundation, and you come and meet the Winshuttle team, and you can get demos, and you can talk to us more. So if you're going to Sapphire, please do step by our booth. We'd love to see you there. And then finally, we just showed you 2 specific examples. We can actually give you a personalized demo with exactly the problems that you're working with. So whatever T codes you're having issues with, just contact us, and we can set up a personalized demo, and you can see how it's actually going to solve your very specific problems. And if you are a current customer, which again, there was a lot of you on this webcast today, reach out to us, as Charles was saying, at support.winshuttle.com, and you can get help with actually getting your hands on the new version of Studio. So with that, thank you very much, Charles. Those were some great demos. And thanks to all of you out there. We had more than 1,100 people sign up for this event, so that just shows there's great interest in using Excel and SAP together. So thank you, everyone, for your time. We really appreciate it.